It's not just a plague like COVID-19 that threatens the well-being and survival of civil society. What is happening in Myanmar, the brutal action by military authorities against the citizens with deadly weapons, is nothing but a plague that threatens the human community as well as the fate of Myanmar. So I condemn again in the strongest possible terms the brutal use of lethal forces against the civilians of Myanmar and the detention of State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi and President Win Myint, as well as thousands of protesters. Dear global citizens, I tell you that the Myanmar crisis is neither a domestic situation nor an internal matter. Just as COVID-19, which threatens our survival, is a common problem for humanity, the current crisis in Myanmar is a problem that threatens the safety and peace of humankind. The Myanmar crisis should be treated as a problem of the international community, and the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states should not be used as a pretext for inaction in the face of such serious human rights abuses. Therefore, I urged United Nations and the ASEAN leaders to take immediate actions to halt the violence and bloodshed and initiate the process to restore peace and democracy in Myanmar.
The people of Myanmar have so far been incredibly effective in resisting the military's attempt to seize power by mobilizing massive peaceful protests, a nonviolent civil disobedience movement, the CDM, and general strikes by public and private sector workers. There is a dangerous sense that the coup is becoming normalized, even accepted as a new status quo. The international community must act now to prevent this from happening. The world must recognize the historic and inter-ethnic government of national unity as the only legitimate government, while pressuring the military with sanctions, an arms embargo, and a push for justice. SACAM strongly believes it is now time for the international community to turn the table on the Tamil with a three cuts approach, comprising of 1. Cut arms flow, a comprehensive global arms embargo, 2. Cut cash flow, targeted sanctions against the architects of the coup, and 3. Cut the impunity, a referral of the situation in Myanmar to the International Criminal Court by the UN Security Council. The appearance of Lieutenant General Tan Lang in UNODC meeting in April 12 through 16 was a disgrace to the international community.
There is no other threat Burma is facing, either from external powers or ethnic minority armed organizations or Muslim and other non-Buddhist communities. We only have the only threat to stability, welfare, and the future of 54 million. And that threat comes from the very national armed forces named Tatmadaw. Tatmadaw is universally today viewed as nothing but armed gang of terrorists. And secondly, it rests on protest movement by Generation Z who did not grow up with fear, the kind of fear that my generation grew up from 1962 to 1988 under the first original military dictatorship of General Ne Win. So they are fearless.
저희 나라에서 여러 번 군부 쿠데타가 일어났습니다. 1962년에 처음으로 일어나고 1962년에 1988년에 두 번째로 일어나고 지난 2월 1일에 세 번째로 군사 쿠데타가 일어났습니다. 너무 오랫동안 군부 독재 아래에서 모든 거를 참고 열심히 살아왔는데 사실 공부의 눈치만 보고 자유 없이 강압적으로 통제를 받으며 살아오면서 북만들이 사여왔기 때문이라고 할 수 있습니다. 게다가 시민들이 평화적으로 민주주의로 요구하는데 문제는 시민들의 요구를 고려하기는 컴냥 마해를 저지르고 있고 사상자의 수천 명이 발생하고 있습니다. 여러분이 잘 아시겠지만 버마는 유엔이 인정한 최비군 중 하나입니다. 국제 시민사회가로부터 지원이 오고 있다고 하지만 버마는 보건, 교육, 경제 등 모든 것이 무너지고 있어서 시민들의 삶이 무척 어려워졌습니다. 이런 큰 위기 속에서 시민들은 서로 돕고 보호하고 나누면서 어렵게 삶과 투쟁을 유지해가고 있습니다. 원래 시간이 걸리더라도 저희 버마 시민들이 끝까지 포기하지 않는 것이기 때문에 결국 이겨낼 것입니다. 아마 민주화가 될 때까지 저희 시민들에게 응원을 계속 보내주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 잘 부탁드립니다.
The sense of resistance and power of voice these youth have demonstrated over the past few months were astounding. Their ways of showing resistance without any usage of aggression, by banging pots and leading a motorbike protest, caught my attention. From ordinary individuals, they had become leaders of the resistance. These unarmed protesters were witnessing and experiencing the brutality of the military with their own eyes. In April, the military carried out a suppression strategy, which was no different from a military operation. At this point, they seemed to know that they would have to risk their own lives to be out on the streets. The kind of torture and violence carried out on these people is absolutely awful. The day after the arrest of Waimo Naing, his face with visible scars of torture was shown on a state-operated television. The faces of other protesters who have been caught and tortured were soon after shown on television as well. Other dictatorships I have covered in the past were more interested in getting rid of the evidence of torture, whereas the Myanmar's military has been proudly exposing them to the world as if they're trophies. Their intention seems to be focused on provoking a nationwide fear and showing off their government power. They're using the people's vulnerable state of mind as a weapon to manipulate the protesters and the general public. Now is the time for all of us to step in. These youth, who are fighting for their lives, are somebody's sons and daughters. When it comes to human rights, there are no borders. They deserve to be protected, and we should all have their backs. As global citizens, we have to put an end to this bloodbath. Please stop these atrocities in Myanmar. Right this moment, as we're gathered here this afternoon, could be the golden time.
So I think because South Korea is also one of the most vibrant, I would say the most vibrant Asian democracy with a long history of successful democratization and development, having fought different dictatorship regimes, starting with President Park Chung-hee, Chan Do-won, and others.
That is why the military, the illegal junta, has to stop this unilateral, lethal crackdown, violence that it's using on its own people. You cannot expect the people to stay nonviolent forever, because right now the military is coming into your home and shooting even your children, very young children, and shooting everybody at sight, looting, taking everything. How do you expect a population to say peace and not do anything? That is going to not hold. And we would like that the people would be more peaceful, and not resort to violence, and young people not resort to violence. But at one point, that's not going to happen sooner or later. So it's important that, first of all, the military, and there has to be much pressure, much more pressure for the military to stop all of its, to lay down its arms. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.